My name is Gabe Vega.
And I'm Justin Franco, and this is our TED Talk on gambling sponsorship.
Gambling in America and modern gambling has an extensive history dating back to the foundation of the country, and thus this history is pertinent to understanding why the landscape of gambling and association with sports is the way it is today. When the Revolutionary War began, states found a large lottery sum to be a suitable method of funding the war. Being that the country was mostly poor farmers, the opportunity to get rich off of the government was enticing enough to buy tickets, which were then used to pay for materials and wages. Universities like Harvard and Yale also drew resources from this idea, as the lottery provided a sizable amount of money in their foundations. Once states like Louisiana were found to be corrupting the system, though, the event was banned or heavily regulated essentially until the states needed money again. In regards to sports betting, however, horse racing was the first area to have wagering on events. With the founding of the Triple Crown events between 1867 and 1875, horse managers and owners were able to have friendly popularity in this arena extended to casinos and wagers and other areas as well. Additionally, sports grew more popular, and since the gambling sector was essentially unregulated, scandals began to occur between the two and shaped the public perception of gambling and sports. By 1919, American sports had suffered a major scandal with the infamous Chicago Black Sox. They were found guilty of throwing the World Series that year, and 8 players were banned from Major League Baseball, including the star of the team, Shoeless Joe Jackson. The scandal led to the implementation of the first commissioner of sports, so that they could, quote-unquote, protect the integrity of the game, a still popular ethos for commissioners across the sports today. Another major scandal just occurred a few decades later in college basketball. Since gambling was a black market, as it is to a large extent today, lines and spreads were established by organized crime. These crime syndicates began paying players large bribes to point, shave, and throw games. In 1951, this led to the admission of taking bribes by 32 players at 7 different schools. Due to all the negative publicity with gambling and sports, it made it more difficult for betting organizations everywhere. Casinos in Las Vegas were charged a 10% tax, basically making their businesses untenable until it was decreased in 1974. Today, black market gambling is still rampant, with an estimated $80 to $380 billion spent yearly on gambling. Conversely, we can look at the history in the United Kingdom as to how sports gambling was naturally integrated into their sports. One example is a cricket league that was founded in the 1800s that included a section in the rules about how to properly bet on a match. The British also never suffered a scandal like the Black Sox, so gambling was never attempted to be removed from sports since there was never reason to negatively react to the activity. Gambling was also technically illegal until 1961 in the UK, but it was condoned since the people gambling never performed other criminal acts. Since then, gambling has been widely accepted within the sports community.
With this background information, we can look at an established gambling nation, the UK, to be viewed as a case in how to handle gambling in a region. The UK makes gambling available everywhere from cell phones, betting stalls and stadiums, and even remotes based on your cable provider. Sponsorship is also, for the most part, unregulated. While you won't see any advertisements from tobacco companies, gambling companies are generally free of all restrictions. The first restrictions came in the UK Gambling Act of 2005. This act stated clearly that gambling companies were restricted from marketing directly to children. This included all programming, TV, radio, websites that were focused towards children. This even includes children's sports clothing that may be sponsored by gambling companies. As for gambling provider sponsorship that is allowed to take place, one of the main and most prevalent is shirt sponsors for the top 2 leagues of English soccer. A 2018 Guardian article notes nearly 60% of teams in the top 2 leagues in England have shirts sponsored by gambling companies. For instance, broadcasters, as a part of their feature sponsor, sometimes highlight gambling lines on the broadcast, telling viewers, bet here, but do so responsibly. Will American broadcasts soon turn to this practice? While sports is not technically a youth-specific program, Vulnerable people who may be more likely to gambling issues are paying attention to the sports world. Specifically, males under the age of 34 are far more likely than the general public to succumb to gambling addictions. Ultimately, the same problems have arisen overseas and specifically in the UK will carry over to the United States if we are not prepared for the injection of sponsorship that is ready to pounce and capitalize on the pockets of Americans. Beginning in 1992 with the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, or PASPA, the United States stated that all sports gambling outside of the state of Nevada would be illegal. However, this act did not stop Americans from gambling on sports. Domestic gambling has been a consistently growing industry for many years. Since PASPA was enacted, there have been two major gambling scandals that have rocked professional sports leagues in the U.S. The first was by an NHL coach by the name of Rick Tosche. Tosche led a gambling ring in New Jersey that involved multiple NHL players, and he was caught in 2006. The second and most famous of the two was in 2007. Tim Donaghy, an NBA referee, was investigated by the FBI on the grounds of fixing games. Donaghy was sentenced to prison, but the deeper scandal was that it was found that nearly half of the NBA officials at the time had made bets in casinos. The American Gaming Association estimated that in 2017, around $150 billion is bet on sports, the majority of which is gambled on offshore and black market books. Some of the main arguments for legalizing the industry include eliminating a major black market of offshore gambling, as well as the ability to tax a lot of the money that is already illegally gambled. This past May, the Supreme Court stated that PASPA was unconstitutional, thus allowing the states to decide if they would like to institute sports gambling. This ultimately led to a firestorm by the individual states and professional sports leagues. The following states have enacted and set up sports books and already built casinos or separate sports books altogether: New Mexico, Mississippi, West Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Rhode Island, and the already established Nevada sports books. New York and Arkansas have also recently passed a bill that will introduce sports gambling in the near future. 16 states and Washington, D.C. recently introduced bills to enact sports gambling. However, they did not pass in the recent midterm elections. Not only does the Supreme Court's ruling open the door to states opening sports books, it also allows professional leagues to be able to monetize on the situation. So far, of the major four professional sports leagues, only the NFL has not agreed to a partnership with a gambling provider. The NBA, MLB, and NHL have all agreed with MGM Grand Casinos to be the official gambling or gaming partner of each league. Because the MLB was the most recent agreement, we will delve deeper into that case specifically. The best way to break down the MLB and MGM Grand agreement is to understand what both parties, as well as the players, will receive. Starting with the MLB, although financial terms were not released, Maury Brown of Forbes stated that the deal is substantial for Major League Baseball. Fans have been gambling on baseball for as long as the sport has existed in some form or fashion. This deal will allow the MLB to cash in on this billion-dollar industry. MGM will be allowed to domestically promote its brand and gaming options across MLB's digital and broadcast platforms, including MLB Network, MLB.com, MLB At Bat app, and additional fan engagement offerings. MGM will also receive enhancing statistics, which they will use to set future betting lines. MGM will also have a presence at MLB Jewel events such as the All-Star Game and the World Series, as well as overseas grassroots events. The MLB players in this situation are seemingly left in a difficult place as the majority of their statistics or data are being handed to MGM. The MLB and MLB Players Association must have brokered a deal, or a massive lawsuit is sure to come shortly. When the possibility of legalized gambling came to be, All four of the major leagues' players' associations released a joint statement to emphasize that each union's member deserved a piece of the lucrative gambling pie. Although the majority of the four major leagues have agreed to major deals with gambling providers, there's still a clear lack of necessary regulation on the issue. While it will take time, regulation on all levels, specifically sponsorship, is needed to ensure the vice of gambling does not harm a significant number of individuals.
With this expansion of gambling and it becoming mainstream across the world, discussing the dark side of the partnership is a necessity. In this, there is the public health concern of creating society that emphasizes gambling and doesn't address the issue of problem gambling. Going back to the UK, they somewhat face this issue already in that since their Gambling Act of 2005, there has been a proliferation of gambling sponsorship for the EPL and the Scottish Premier League, the SPL. Due to the increase in sponsorship and related normalization of gambling, vulnerable groups are increasingly at risk of developing a gambling problem. Sponsorship is generally done for increased market penetration or brand awareness. With the casinos and betting sites, they are trying to appear more favorable to their potential market. The problem with this, however, is that people can obviously become addicted to gambling. Specifically, gambling sponsors have a target market that lines up with the audience that follows sports the most, young male adults. Unfortunately, young male adults are the most likely to develop problem gambling, as stated. This sponsorship association with groups that people follow and find to be acceptable and healthy behavior then transfers that image to gambling, which is obviously an adverse result for the public. Therefore, there is a large contingent of people that want there to be increased regulation to protect chronic gamblers, young male adults, and minors. In order to protect them, we propose a conceptual framework as outlined by researchers. Primarily, this framework follows corporate social responsibility, as well as tying in four key stakeholders. To begin, we have the first stakeholder, which is the sponsor. The company must hold themselves accountable by showing the detrimental effects of their gambling advertisements, for example. Also, they will have to be aware of regulations and not attempt to evade them. Being aware of how sponsorship affects society as a whole and providing help to those who are affected. It may be a weird dynamic like that of an alcohol company supporting an alcohol anonymous group, but in order to satisfy and exceed their social responsibility, they must be cognizant and helpful. The next stakeholder is the sponsee or the property, which in this case are the sports leagues. These teams need to be socially responsible and not just cater to their self-interest, greed, and acceptance of all avenues of money. They have the social responsibility to look out for how their sports are perceived and who they associate themselves with. This isn't to say that they always do this, since we know this not to be true. As an article published on the BMC Public Health about sponsorship in New Zealand, it shows that an unhealthy brand, i.e. alcohol, fast food, or gambling, is twice as likely to sponsor an organization as a healthy brand, something like a fruit and vegetable stand, health agency, etc. These organizations range from junior programs to professional as well, which shows that there is a lack of responsibility in accepting monies. However, this negative correlation does not negate the fact that sports organizations should promote healthy lifestyles as a part of their corporate social responsibility. Thirdly, we have government and regulatory agencies. This group of stakeholders is responsible for public policy, the main form of power they have in this forum. As elected officials, they should be looking out for their constituents and bringing regulations forward that will protect their people. The last and fourth stakeholder is the public, and they are responsible for bringing public health issues to the forefront of conversation, something that is now starting to be done with recent literature posted by researchers and the general public just making everyone aware of it. The biggest issue, however, is avoiding what happened in the UK from happening in the US. The United Kingdom faces serious problems of gambling sponsorship in sporting events that can affect the youth who are more susceptible to positive images for negative habits, even with the rules currently in place. If the United States does not learn from the fallout of the Gambling Act of 2005, which they don't seem to have taken heed to, then there will be a mess to clean up just like abroad. With nearly 5 times as many people in the United States, a massive problem could be on the horizon without proactive regulation and corporate social responsibility.